Sometimes it's good to be the preacher. Sometimes. Started this evening. It's good to be here with you. It's good to have all of you here as well. Before we do get going tonight, Blake Gardner is going to lead us in an opening prayer.
Thank you for the chance to come together and study your word. Please give us, please help us to be faithful and learn and apply to our lives. Please lift us all together and believe us to be amen. Please keep us all from being safe.
All right, tonight, where we left off last week, and we didn't get to the plagues, we just covered chapters 5 and 6. So tonight we're going to be looking at chapters 7 through 12, roughly, and not all of 12, because we're going to go into a different subject there with that next week. But primarily we're going to be focusing our attention on the plagues, okay? And the plagues served a very definite purpose in God's plan for mankind, okay? And what was that purpose in a nutshell? What was the purpose behind the plagues? Anybody have any idea? That they would know that He is the Lord, okay? And you're going to see that phrase repeated over and over again as we look at these. Now, all I've done is I've just taken the plagues one at a time and noticed a few interesting things about them. And what I want you to do is as we go through these, if you have a question or if you notice something that I've overlooked, go ahead and raise your hand and go ahead and comment. Remember, though, I had a hard time with this last week. I'm deaf in one ear, and you all got masks on, okay? So that makes it a real challenge. I was taking a wild guess at what Micah was talking about last week. I think I got most of it right because I confirmed it with her on Sunday. But she was talking about the idea, remember we talked about the magicians casting down the rods, and they turned into serpents, okay? They fully expected those rods to turn into serpents, didn't they? I mean, there was no hesitation on their part. And so Micah suggested that God allowed certain individuals to actually perform miracles or wonders or magic, if you will, in order to demonstrate His superiority over them, okay? And we're not to necessarily take those instances, if you will, and apply them across the board like, it happens today, okay? But God, in His revealing of Himself, would allow certain things to be done. I mean, what's another perfect example of God allowing some supernatural event that typically we wouldn't expect? What? Well, Simon the sorcerer, he may have been doing parlor tricks. I don't know. It says he had him bewitched with all kinds of things. I'm thinking about when Saul went to the witch of Endor and wanted to speak with Samuel, right? And so Samuel comes up, and how did the witch react? I think she freaked out. She was stunned. So God allowed that, and He allowed it to convey a very particular message to Saul. He said, "You're going to be with me before you know it," right? And Saul wasn't too thrilled with that message, okay? All right, so those are some interesting instances. All right, let's get into the plagues here. I put together some slides, and of course, the first plague is God turning the water in Egypt to blood, right? So water turned to blood. What's significant about God turning the Nile River to blood? It was their source of water. It was their source of life. They worshiped the Nile, okay? We're going to read a couple of times where God tells Moses, go to Pharaoh as he goes down to the water, okay? And the idea is Pharaoh is going down most likely to worship when he goes down to the Nile River, okay? So this is very significant. There's a number of times where God is going to perform a plague that actually kind of attacks one of the Egyptian gods, if you will. All right? So we've got water turned to blood here. And when we look at this miracle, it takes place in chapter 7, beginning at verse 14. Okay? We're going to notice a few things about it. One, on your chart there, you've got, put an X in these different things. A warning is given. Okay? So Moses actually warns Pharaoh that this is going to happen. You look at verses 17 through 18, and it says, "Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die. The river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river." So obviously, if the water is turned to blood, the fish are going to die. And that's going to be a great source of income and revenue and sustenance for the people of Israel as well. So this is kind of a double whammy here. All right? And so he gives them a warning that this is about to happen. Right? What's significant about these warnings? Why are they important? For most of these miracles, Moses actually gives a warning for most of these plagues. A couple of them he doesn't, but most of them he does. Why is that important? Okay, then he raises a really good and often overlooked point. A lot of times we look at the plagues and we see them as punishment or we see them as judgments, and that clearly they are, right? Because Pharaoh refuses constantly. He hardens his heart. But they are also acts of mercy, right? And he is warning Pharaoh, says, look, this is what's going to happen if you don't let my people go. Stuart. Yeah.
Because if he doesn't have the warning, well, how do we know this is God?
Yeah, this is just a freak thing, but if God says I'm going to do it and it happens, they can't just write it off as some coincidence. Okay? So it's like God is telling Pharaoh through Moses, this is what I'm going to do. One of the things that we're going to notice as we look at these plagues is certain timetables are given as well. So we realize this is not just a natural occurrence that is running its course. God is actually bringing an end to this plague, or God is actually starting this plague when he says he's going to do so. Okay? So that's one of the things behind the warnings being given, right? Never forget, though, that the idea behind the plagues, what's the last plague? The death of the firstborn. Is there anything more extreme than that? Okay, that's the big one. Okay, God is trying to get Pharaoh and the Egyptians to relent before that takes place. Okay, now that might sound kind of odd because throughout you see God's hardening Pharaoh's heart, right? And God's hardening Pharaoh's heart, and he says, "For this reason I've raised you up, that people are going to be able to see." What God is doing is he's using a man's behavior to accomplish his will, to accomplish his purpose. Okay? Person doesn't have to be a child of God for God to use them to accomplish his purpose. Is God violating Pharaoh's free will in any of this? No. Pharaoh hardens his heart. God hardens Pharaoh's heart by telling him to do something he doesn't want to do. Right? Anita. Yeah, that's right. When he brings the hail and everything, he says, look, bring everybody out from the field because I'm going to send this hail, and it's going to kill people. Okay. All right, next thing is the plague is total. A lot of times you think, okay, the Nile was turned to blood. Look at verse 19. says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, and over all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and vessels of stone. Okay? All the water in Egypt was turned to blood. Okay? And I mean, this very first plague, how much of an attention getter is that going to be? You need water to live. And everywhere you look, it's blood. You know, it's not brackish water. Okay? It's blood.
Okay, he's going to turn them out of blood. So I'll just go get me some water
Mm-hmm.
and have that. No, that turns to blood also.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no water.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you've had people over the centuries try to explain these plagues as natural occurrences. Okay. Have we ever heard of a thing called like a red tide? Okay. You get algae blooms that will turn water red and it will kill off all the fish. And so some people say, well, yeah, that's what's going on here. Right. But no, because the water in the pots are turning to blood. Okay. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. I mean, all the land. This was not just a localized event. And the magicians imitated it. Okay? That goes back to what Micah was talking about. The Egyptians, God let them, yeah, okay, I'll let you turn water to blood as if you need more of that, right? Ken? Right. Yeah, it turned to blood everywhere they had water. Okay? So the magicians imitate it in verse 22. And I'm kind of wondering where they got the water to turn to blood. You know, unless it was just kind of a gradual turning or something. And the Egyptians had to dig for water. In 724, it says, so all the Egyptians dug all around the river for water to drink because they could not drink the water of the river. Okay? How long did this plague last? 7 days. How long can a human being last without water? About 3 days, right? So obviously they're getting water from digging next to the river. God didn't turn the water underground to blood, apparently, because this lasts for 7 days and they're digging for water to drink. Okay? All right. So we got 7 days for this first plague. And the land stank because of all the dead fish. There's going to be another plague here pretty soon that's going to cause things to stink too. The Nile was also worshipped. It's worshipped as one of their gods or their life givers. All right, that brings us then to the second plague. Okay, what's the second plague? Frogs, right? Going to bring frogs up on the land. Okay, and we're going to read about that in chapter 8. And of course, there's a warning given about the frogs in chapter 8, verse 2. It says, but if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs. So the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, into your bedchamber, on your bed, into the houses of your servants, on your people, into your ovens, and into your kneading bowls. Okay? All over Egypt. How comfortable is that going to make you all feel? Not at all, right? Some people don't mind frogs. I look at them and I'm like, no, you keep your distance over there, right? And frog legs, oh yeah. Morgan, when he was out here, he went down to the catfish hole. He said, oh, they got frog legs. I'm going to try those. He couldn't finish them. So the idea is like God's going to bring these frogs up and he's going to bring them everywhere. Okay? And again, the magicians imitated that. In verse 7, it says, the magicians did so with their enchantments and brought up frogs on the land of Egypt. And to me, this is just comical. Okay? We've got water turned to blood, and we're going to make more blood. We've got frogs in our ovens, and we're going to call a few more. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's like if you really had power, wouldn't you be sending them back into the river? Right? So the magicians imitate this one as well. Their days of imitation are coming to an end here. And so now Pharaoh promises release in verse 8. And he's going to do this a number of times. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go that they may sacrifice to the Lord. Okay? So you've got Pharaoh. He says, all right, I've seen enough. I'll let the people go that they can sacrifice to the Lord. No restrictions, just a blanket statement. I'll let them go. Okay? Now we have a that you may know statement. It's actually the second one here in verses 9 through 11. And there's an issue of timing here as well. And Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor of saying that I shall intercede for you, for your servants, and for your people to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only. So he said, tomorrow. And he said, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. And the frogs shall depart from you, from your houses, from your servants, and from your people, and they shall remain in the river only. So Moses says, you let me know when you want these frogs to go. And Pharaoh, I don't understand why you didn't say right now. Right? He said tomorrow. Okay? And then, of course, that's what happens. And that, again, indicates that this is not just some random occurrence, that God hears Moses interceding. Pharaoh has set the time, and that's when it happens. So God just turns all them frogs around and sends them right back into the river, right? No. Never accuse God of not having a sense of humor, right? He simply killed the frogs in verses 13 through 14. It says, so the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them as the Lord had said. So Pharaoh doesn't keep his word again. And frogs were a symbol of fertility, and they worshipped as a fertility god. So again, God is showing his superiority over their gods. Okay? Just lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back around the station after a while. Okay? So here's the frogs, right? And the land's stinking again. Okay? First the fish in the Nile, now the frogs. Okay? What's the third plague? Lice. Okay? What's that a picture of? That's a cloud of gnats, right? Okay? Anybody here ever play right field? If you play right field, what do you got to do? Get those stupid gnats out of your face, right? How many of us have been pestered by a single gnat? Right? Okay, why am I talking about gnats? They're called lice in the scriptures, right? But more likely, they're gnats, okay? In fact, this is the way the ESV translates the word lice. It translates it as gnats. Some people suggest they could have been mosquitoes as well. The Hebrew language just isn't really that clear on it, okay? Post-biblical Hebrew translates the word as lice. But before that, it was translated generally as gnats, okay? And notice here that there's no warning given in this one, okay? There's no warning. And look at verse 17, chapter 8 of verse 17. Well, let's turn to verse 16. So the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so. For Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. I mean, this is just a little localized cloud of gnats here. Okay. But what did he strike with his rod? What became gnats? All the dust of Egypt. Okay? We're not talking about one or two gnats bothering you. We're talking about like the dust of Egypt, right? I mean, just walking out of your door and down the road in Egypt to your neighbor's house, okay? How much dust are you going to kick up? How much dust is going to cling to you? That's the extent of this particular plague. These people would have been choking on gnats. Anybody here accidentally swallowed a bug? Yeah. It's like, you'd be so surrounded by gnats, you wouldn't want to breathe. You'd be thankful for the masks if you were living in the time of these gnats. The magicians cannot duplicate this one. In verse 18, it says, now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice on man and beast. Okay? And then we have a confession by the magicians in verse 19. In verse 19, it says, then the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. Right? So again, we've got this incredible plague of these flying insects.
That's one of those, the Egyptians sitting there saying, we can't duplicate it, Pharaoh's like,
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's just like, okay, don't do any more damage. It's kind of done.
Yeah, we don't need one more gnat around here. All right, so that brings us to the fourth plague. And basically, it's just larger bugs, right? It's plague of flies. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this plague is that it is actually, the translation in the Hebrew is a horde of flying insects. Okay. The King James translation of flies is just as good as any, but this could have been any kind of flying insect. It could have been mosquitoes, it could have been flies, it could have been wasps, it could have been bees, it could have been all kinds of things, right? According to the Hebrew. But it's just flying insects. So everybody translates it as flies. But it's a horde of flying insects. And he calls it a horde, definitely, or a swarm in some of our Bibles. So, when's the last time you were sitting quietly in your home, trying to read a book, and that one obnoxious fly lands on your knee? And you shoo it off and you try to get back to your book. But then it's going to land on your knee about 30 seconds later. And it's just distracting you to no end. And it's just right there. So you get up and you get the fly swatter, right? And what happens to the fly? It disappears. Right? You can't see it. It's gone someplace else. They have a sixth sense. Barry Kirschel used to call them box flies. Because they get in the middle of a room, they just fly in a box pattern. You know, watch them, they'll do that sometimes. Ken?
I can't see why there's flies up there. All the blood and all the
Yeah, exactly. You've got dead fish. You've got, floating on the surface of the Nile. You have got dead frogs. Okay. You've got, a land that stinks. And now you've got these swarms of flies. What?
Are they still dealing with the gnats as well? Does it indicate who's the gnats?
Yeah, it doesn't. Don't know. Don't know. Don't know. It doesn't say. Some of the plagues it says 3 days. Sometimes it'll say 7 days. Some plagues it'll be a day. It'll start today. It'll end tomorrow. But some of these, it doesn't say when they came to an end or anything. It just says, we got these gnats all over the place and we can't do anything about it. And it doesn't say he petitioned Moses to take them away or anything. So maybe this is an addition, right? There is a warning given here, though, in verses 20 through 21. says, and the Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water. That would be to worship. Then say to him, thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms or hordes of flies on you and your servants and your people and into your houses. The houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. Now, in the New King James, the word flies is in italics. It's just swarms, which indicates it could be any kind of flying insect. It could include the gnats, right? And even on the ground. There's going to be flies even covering the ground, right? I don't know about you, and I know there's different cultures and what have you, but flies just kind of gross me out. You know, you're sitting there, you're having dinner, you got that one fly, it starts landing on things. Like, that'll start to ruin my appetite, you know, pretty quick. Swarms, right? I mean, just looking at something or imagining something like that picture up there, like, no thanks, right? Often flies bite, don't they? Right? There's certain kinds of flies that'll bite you, Ken.
Ever been to July or around the Great Lakes, main flies come up? You have I mean,
Yeah.
stop the gas, and it's on the
Yeah. When I was in Colorado, the people I was staying with had 5 horses they used to take care of, right? And there were flies always in their kitchen. I mean, he'd be in there and with fly swatter, 18, 19, 20, you couldn't keep them out of the house, right? Can you imagine being around stockyards and what have you? It's just all over the place. And so God sends these swarms of flies. They're even on the ground. But Israel, and this is the first time it says, Israel is shielded. In verses 22 and 23, it says, and in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the land. I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall be. So he gives a warning. He says, this is coming tomorrow, right? And the way they can be assured that this sign is actually not some natural occurrence is because there's going to be flies in Egypt, but not among my people. Not in Goshen. You're not going to have any flies here in Goshen. Right? So again, that you may know. And Pharaoh promises release in verse 28. Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, only you shall not go very far away. Intercede for me. And God waits a day before ending the plague. In verse 29. Then Moses said, indeed, I am going out from you. I will entreat the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. But let Pharaoh not deal deceitfully anymore in not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So he says, so tomorrow, you're going to have to put up with this again all night, okay, or all afternoon, or the rest of this day. It's going to happen tomorrow. And then also, take a look at verse 31. Now, this is the part of the miracle I wouldn't mind. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. Can you imagine that? Not one remained. We're going to come across that phrase again as well. Okay. Yet, in verse 32, Pharaoh hardens his heart again, and he refuses to release. It's like anytime he feels like, okay, I've got the upper hand, anytime he feels like things have gone his way, he just backs right up and says, no, I'm not going to let him go. Okay. You would think after this that he would start to get the hint that, look, every time I change my mind, something even worse happens. Now, the water to blood was significant, okay? But these next 3, you've got frogs, you've got gnats, and you've got flies. What do all these affect? What? Well, agriculture, but more importantly and more directly, individual comfort. Yeah. Okay, Sunday night, we're out there for Jansen and Lucy's shower, right? How many of you heard a mosquito by your ear? You know, it's like, whoa. You know, you hear that? I mean, the frogs make you uncomfortable. They stink. The gnats are just a pest. They stink. The flies are just a pest. They stink, right? I mean, they stink in a general way. Right? So the idea is like, this is just aggravating. This is just frustrating, okay? And so God is constantly attacking their comfort levels here, all right? So then that moves us on to the next plague. And now God's going to start dealing with the economy. Okay, and this is the diseased livestock. So the livestock is diseased, and we read about this in chapter 9, and again, there's a warning given in verses 1 through 3. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go in to Pharaoh and tell him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, and on the sheep. There will be a very severe pestilence." So there's the warning. But Israel again is shielded. In verse 4, Moses says, "And the Lord will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel." So Pharaoh cannot blame this on, okay, this is just some kind of disease that infected the cattle and it's running through Egypt. Because where does it stop? Right at the border of Goshen, right? Not one of them is going to perish. And this is demonstrating to Pharaoh, this is actually from the Lord. Okay? In verses 5 through 6, God sets a definite time. Then the Lord appointed a set time, saying, "Tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land." So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. And then Pharaoh sent, and indeed not even one of the livestock of the Israelites was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go. So it sounds like this is going to happen tomorrow. And so then the next day, it sounds like, boom, all the livestock died. Doesn't say it took a week. Doesn't say it took, a few days. It says they died, right? And then Pharaoh, he sends to Goshen. He says, let's see about this. Not one of Israel's livestock had perished. And so Pharaoh prostrates himself before God, right? He just hardens his heart again, okay? Not one of Israel's livestock was dead. The cattle were considered sacred by the Egyptians. So again, he's attacking their pantheon, if you will. And then the next plague is what? Boils, okay? The next plague is boils. And believe me, you do not want to look up boils on the internet, okay? And I'm sparing you here by not showing you boils on the internet. There's just a drawing, right? Missy? Where the flies what? I can't hear a word you're saying.
With the gods of Egypt, be the same as the gods of Goshen.
Oh, okay. Would the gods of Egypt be the same as the gods of Goshen? Well, the people in Goshen are Israelites, right? And I think that's the distinction that's being made. But you would expect that the Jews would think that the gods of Egypt were the gods of all of Egypt, right? Not the Jews, the Egyptians, right? So I don't know how that would play into it necessarily. But God is certainly making a distinction.
To all Egypt is similar to how Galilee, Egypt is. So Goshen is a specific region in Egypt, is a little bit different.
I'm glad you answered the question, Sean. Thank you. I'll ask you what your answer was afterwards. Okay. I'm saving up for hearing aids. I really am. Okay. So boils are just horrific. Okay. And it says these boils, there's no warning given. Okay. If you take a look at verse 8, it says, so the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourselves handfuls of ashes from a furnace. Let Moses scatter it toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh. And it will become fine dust in all the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils that break out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. Not just the people of Egypt, but the remaining beasts of Egypt. Okay? This word boils is also translated as a burning rash. Okay? And there's a lot of different illnesses that can be called or styled as boils, if you will. Ken. Well, when it says all the livestock died, I don't know if it's talking about specifically, I don't know if that's hyperbolic, talk, because you're going to read about livestock suffering again, even after it says they all died, right? So, I mean, even when it hails, God warns them, bring in the livestock from the field, right? Austin. Okay. Yeah. Maybe they could have played cattle rustlers, right? And come and stolen the Jews' livestock. Okay. Sean. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But there's something even more interesting about this. No one is spared from this plague. It doesn't say, and notice I've got a question mark by that, right? Because consistently it says the land of Goshen, the Israelites will be shielded, right? This won't happen there. But this one, it doesn't say that, right? And so it makes me wonder, were they spared? And this is just, on mission, maybe there was no need to say it. Or were they afflicted with these boils just like everybody else? And if so, for what purpose? Austin. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, right? Earlier it says throughout all the land of Egypt, right? But there it says just the Egyptians, right? It doesn't say just the Egyptians, it says the Egyptians. So Israel may have been spared from this. And again, that's why I got a question mark up there. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't just Israelites that lived in Goshen necessarily. All right. Good point. All right, because as I'm reading this and I'm looking at it, I'm not sure why God would be striking his own people with these horrible burning rashes or boils and their livestock as well, because it seems like that just end up kind of destroying them. We know that God wants Israel to know, who he is, but that's a pretty severe lesson at this point. Okay. The magicians cannot stand before Moses. Okay? Not only could they not, I'm sure nobody wants a few more boils, right? But not only can they not repeat it, they can't even stand. In verse 11, it says, and the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. Okay? So it's a horrible plague. And then the one after that, of course, hail, right? We have hail falling from the heavens. Is this any ordinary hail? No, it says there's fire mixed in with it. There's thunder. There's lightning, right? So this is just a devastating cataclysm, if you will, coming down from the heaven. And you wonder, how much can Egypt take? I mean, this is just really taking its toll. A warning is given here in chapter 9 of verse 18. Behold, tomorrow about this time, I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as not been seen in Egypt since its founding until now. Right? And so then he says, therefore send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every beast which is found in the field and is not brought home, and they shall die. So he who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But those who didn't regard it left them out in the field. Okay? And again, verses 14 through 16, that you may know. For at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart, and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Now, if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this purpose I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. So again, you have purpose stated here. I could have removed Egypt from the earth, verse 15. Okay? But he didn't. And the reason he didn't was so he could proclaim his power over them. Okay? And then I imagine there was some mercy involved there as well. But he says, for this reason I have raised you up. Says, what does he mean to your very heart in verse 14? At the end of verse 13 it says, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. For at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart, and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. Is he saying that, look, you haven't seen nothing yet? What's coming is designed to get your attention, right? And it's going to go straight to your heart.
But it says that at this time I will send all my plagues on you and yourself. Does that mean that all the other Egyptians were affected and he wasn't? I mean, I know the blood and all of this was on everything, but was Pharaoh not affected the way it treated me?
No, I think Pharaoh was affected because he keeps saying he hardened his heart, and he asked for those things to be taken away. Stuart?
It almost seems to lend to the idea that all the other things, yes, Father Pharaoh, all that stuff, it wasn't that big deal. These are things that matter to them. Like, just little steps back, and God affect that.
Okay.
It would be like if you're in love with trains, God says,
Okay. Yeah, I kind of look at it like my dad said, Craig, you know, you did something wrong, I'm going to give you a spanking. It's like, okay. But if he says, Craig, you did something wrong, you're on restriction for a week, now I'm a puddle of goo, right? You know, he said it to my very heart. Ken?
Livestock here, because it talks about the servant of Pharaoh to bring the livestock. Maybe the servant of the Egyptians was affected. I don't know.
No, I think everybody's affected. I think what you see there with the servants, there were some of Pharaoh's servants that heeded Moses, and there were some of Pharaoh's servants that were standing firm with Pharaoh, right? They didn't heed Moses. Okay? And those servants of Pharaoh told their servants, because, I mean, you got a servant of Pharaoh, let's say he's the chamberlain or the butler or whatever. Believe me, he's got servants under him. And he said, hey, I got word here. I got a hot tip. This is all coming down, so bring my cattle in, right? And you guys take shelter in these houses. But then you had some servants of Pharaoh, and it's like they just ignored it, most likely in solidarity with Pharaoh. Right? You got to remember, who owns Egypt? Pharaoh, lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, he owns the people, he owns the cattle, he owns the building, he owns everything. That's due to who? Joseph, right? Joseph's the one that set that up. Israel, of course, is going to be protected again in verse 26. In verse 26, it says, only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, there was no hail. Based on what Austin was saying, that the boils were on all the Egyptians, you have the livestock diseased, Israel's protected. You have the boils where it doesn't say anything, then you have the hail where they're protected. So I'm probably leaning to the idea that they were protected from the boils as well, right? Anyway, and of course, Pharaoh now confesses, right? The magicians had confessed quite a while ago. Now Pharaoh confesses in verses 27 through 28. And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron and said to them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, my people and I are wicked. Entreat the Lord that there may be no more mighty thundering and hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. And then again, you've got the timing in verse 29. And Moses said to him, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. So now you've got hail, you've got thunder, you've got lightning, you've got fire falling from the heavens. And Moses isn't saying, okay, tomorrow it'll stop. Like that might be a natural occurrence. He says, I'm going to go out right now and stop it. Okay. So again, the timing is an indication that God is in control. And of course, Pharaoh refuses to release the people after all this is over. And then we have the 8th plague, which is locusts. And a warning is given again, that you may know, is stated in verses 1 and 2. Pharaoh's servants finally relent. In chapter 10 of verse 7, it says, then Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? Right? So now Pharaoh's servants are trying to get this obstinate individual to relent. And he won't. How come? Yeah, harden heart. He's a proud little 3-year-old. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to hold out, right? I'm going to show myself that I can survive anything that this God of Israel or the Jews throws at me. And of course, he's not going to. Pharaoh says only the men can go at this point. The extent of the locusts, again in verses 14 and 15. It says in verse 14 and 15, the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested on all the territory of Egypt. They were very severe. Previously, there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there ever be after them. Okay, that picture you're looking at is after. But that doesn't hold the candle to what God did to the Egyptians. Okay? For they covered the face of the whole earth so that the land was darkened. And they ate every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. So there remained nothing green on the trees or on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh confesses again. And then in verse 19, when God sent him away, there was not one locust left. Same thing with the flies. It says, there remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt. That right there is pretty astounding. And then, of course, Pharaoh doesn't relent again. That brings us to the 9th plague, which is what? Darkness. Okay? And so you've got darkness here. There's no warning given. A darkness to be felt in verse 21. It says, a darkness so dark you can feel it. What does that mean? A darkness to be felt.
It is so encompassing. There's no visible light coming from anywhere. Total black. You can't tell what's from your face.
Okay? Danny's coming very close to this. Absolute darkness for a human being is disorienting. You can start to get vertigo, right? How does it play on your psyche? Okay? How many of you have gone into some of these big caves of the earth and have them turn out the lights when you get down to the bottom? So you can experience darkness, right? Can you imagine having to sit in that for how long? 3 days. It says nobody moved for 3 days. I mean, you get up in the middle of the night because you got to use a restroom or something like that, and you can see shadows, right? You can see kind of where you're going, maneuver yourself around, right? You might even have little night lights. They couldn't even light a candle. You know, it's not like they could light a candle or make a fire. It was dark. No light.
Not like it was a moon or stars either.
Yeah. I mean, it's just dark, right? And it is an oppressive dark. And then, of course, it says that no one moved for 3 days in verse 23, and Israel again is shielded. In verse 23 of chapter 10 there, says they did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Right? And so it almost sounds like God allowed the Israelites to light a lamp or light a candle or something like that. And then Pharaoh promises release again. And then Pharaoh refuses release again. And of course, this is Ra, the Egyptian sun god, that's being confronted here. And of course, that brings us to the last one. The death of the firstborn. Okay. And the death of the firstborn, the last plague, is very significant to Israel. Why?
First one was the one who was blessed.
Okay. He got the blessing. He got the double portion for the inheritance. Okay. He was oftentimes considered the father's strength. Okay. The next leader. They're very special, right? It also plays a role in in Israel's history. Why? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to read about the Passover, right? And that Passover is going to play a huge role all the way up through the crucifixion of Christ, right? Christ chose the Passover to be crucified because of the symbolic nature of it, and the symbolism involved in all of it is very, very important to Israel, okay? God redeems the firstborn, right? They're to be redeemed. And it has to do with the Passover. It has to do with the death of the firstborn here in Egypt. It plays very heavily into their religion, okay? So a warning is given in chapter 11, verses 4 through 6. Then Moses said, "Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out into the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the beasts. Then there shall be a great cry throughout all land of Egypt, such as was not like it before, nor shall be like it again." So there's the warning that's given. And again, Israel is shielded. Take a look at chapter 11 at verse 7. "But against none of the children of Israel shall a dog move its tongue against man or beast, that you may know that the Lord does make a difference between the Egyptians and Israel." But as Sean pointed out, Did the Egyptians have to take any kind of action? The blood, on the doorpost, on the lintel, right? They actually have to protect themselves through their obedience to God. Okay? Very important picture for us today when it comes to religion. God's going to judge the world. Can we protect ourselves? Absolutely, right? By claiming our Passover lamb. And then again in verse 7, that you may know. And verse 8 stuck out to me. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, get out, and all the people who follow you. And after that I will go out. Then he went out from Pharaoh in great anger. And I always look at that like, it's come to this. It's come to this, and he is angry about it. Okay, Denny?
Well, I think that's very interesting. He's angry. Because normally you would think now you've got to come at me.
Right.
He wouldn't be angry. He'd be joyous.
Yeah.
He is fixing to get off the stone.
Yeah. Well, it's just like God who says, I have no pleasure in the death of one who dies. And so he's angry as a result of that. And then you have a final statement in verses 9 and 10. But the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. So Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go out of his land. And then when you read in chapter 12, verses 29 through 30, you have the actual death of the firstborn. And it came to pass at midnight that the Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who is in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of livestock. So Pharaoh rose in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. So you have a house, and you've got a couple, and they have no kids. But what if the husband was the firstborn? He dies, right? You have a family of 3. You have a firstborn son, married a firstborn who was a daughter, who had a child. All 3 of them died, right? That's why there is not a single house in Egypt in which there was not someone who died. And pretty severe, so that all may know. And that had to be just an absolute stunner. All right, so next week we're going to pick up in chapters 11 and 12 and move on through with the remaining chapters here.
Good to see everybody out. Glad to see you and look forward to the next opportunity that we get together, which will be Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. So we'll look forward to that. As for announcements, good to see the Griggs back. They were out Sunday, precautionary, and they got good news that somebody that was potentially having COVID-19 did not. So good news there. Give praise to the Lord for that. Other announcement, Mom is having outpatient surgery September 1st. And so this Saturday, September 1st, that's this Sunday, right? Tuesday. Yeah, now this makes sense. All right. So this Saturday, she is getting the COVID-19 test and will be quarantined until Tuesday. So that means she and Dad both will be out Sunday. So keep them in our prayers. Susie's sister, Allie, and her family are asking for prayers. They're in the path of the hurricane that's coming landfall in southeast Texas. And they have a baby that's due Friday, I believe. Is that right? Next Friday a week. So, obviously, if you're getting ready to give birth, you want to be able to get there, not be flooded, and all that good stuff. And so let's keep Allie and her family in our prayers. Steve is having to work late tonight. That explains his absence. Danny Kilgore is sick. That explains his absence. Joe and Beth, her back is bothering her, so she is home. That explains their absence. And then, good news. We have a new family member. Jansen Lynn has placed membership with the Old Wire Rose Church. And so we're super excited to have him here and join with us. And so if you haven't met Jansen, he's right there. And you can't miss him. He's right by Lucy. All right. Are there any other announcements that need to be made that hasn't been made? All right. Good to see everybody. I think Hunter's going to lead us in a closing prayer, and then we'll be dismissed like how we always do, back first, and then we'll work our way up.
Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you now. Thank you for this time that you've given us to worship you and learn more about you. Do anything for Mr. Craig's lessons he gives us to think more about your word and learn more about you. God, dear Lord, we ask you please help us to stay safe as we go throughout our week. Help us to always shine your light in everything we do. We ask you please be with us. In Jesus' name, pray. Amen.